Hello and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. On last week's episode, Davina McCall's consultant neurosurgeon Kevin O'Neill described the complex 5-hour brain tumour surgery he successfully carried out on the TV star and gave us an insight into his world and purpose in life. Kevin talked about his cutting-edge research with the Brain Tumour Research Campaign and how the field remains woefully underfunded despite deaths rising. This week, I'm joined by Wendy Fulcher, who co-founded the charity with Kevin after a devastating loss. Her husband, business partner and soulmate, John, was diagnosed with an aggressive stage 4 glioblastoma brain tumour and died aged 52 in June 2001. Wendy's world, naturally, was shattered. Every 2 hours, someone in England is diagnosed with a brain tumour and embarks on the dreadful journey we all perhaps fear. Today we'll find out what drove Wendy to set up the Brain Tumour Research Campaign with Kevin and how they've given every penny raised, £4.5 million so far, to research and helping others. Wendy, it's so lovely to have you back in the studio. You were sitting on the sofa when Kevin was here telling his side of the story, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the other half of the BTRC story. So thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here. I enjoyed listening to Kevin and you, and it's nice to be in the hot seat today.
Well, you are in the hot seat, no pressure there. But I know that you are absolutely passionate for very personal reasons about brain tumour research. And I just wanted to start off with what you hope Davina's openness and honesty may do in terms of awareness.
I think the brain tumour world is all-consuming, obviously, to those of us who've been on that journey. And we're passionate about it, but it's quite difficult to spread that word to anybody outside of that realm, even though everybody says nowadays everybody knows someone who's been touched by a brain tumour. And I think it's a scary subject in many ways. And so it's been so helpful for Davina to bring it out into the open and to start people talking more about it and wanting to understand more.
Even though her surgery was only in November, she came to your Christmas Carol fundraiser and you met her too, didn't you?
Yes, I did indeed, yes. It was a very last-minute decision. It was literally the evening before the Carol concert that I think she plucked up the courage to actually, I think it was her first public appearance in some ways. And she was absolutely charming. And our Carol concert, we have a very close repeat audience, if you like. We had about 300 people there, but most of them have been touched in some way by a brain tumour. And so it was especially touching. It was literally not a dry eye in the house when she spoke, just because so many people felt what she had felt.
What kind of things did she say? Can you remember from being in the congregation that night?
Yes, her message, clearly, and she's got her lovely buzzword, but what she wanted to bring out was the fact that initially, when it was diagnosed, they said it's a benign tumour. And she kept saying it, benign isn't fine, and that's absolutely true. She realised that although it's a benign tumour, she could have died from it. And I think she touched upon her whole journey, where first she was in denial, and then she realised everybody told her she had to do something about it. And as the day grew closer, she told us she put everything in place for her family, for her children, because she didn't know she was going to wake up. And that's a very scary sensation, but one that many people in the audience had been through.
I bet it was really emotional, actually. And
very touching. Yes.
As you say, not a dry eye in the house, and lovely that she felt that she wanted to come so quickly.
And totally unexpected.
Yeah, which is lovely.
Until the last minute, and nobody in the audience knew she was coming because I hadn't told anybody.
No, I'm sure you'll have a very loyal and wonderful supporter in Davina, as Lorraine Kelly said to Kevin when Kevin went on the Lorraine show. Once you're friends with Davina, you're always friends with Davina. She's a wonderful person. It feels now that the whole nation is aware of who Kevin is, as Davina, in her words, outed her surgeon on socials. They graced the cover of the Times magazine. Kevin's been on live TV. But you met Davina's hero, the man she credits for saving her life, many, many years ago, more than 20 years ago, when he cared for John.
Indeed, and he is my hero too. even though he couldn't save John. But as Kevin said himself during his interview, he is very good and he really enjoys making friends with his patients and his patients' family. And I felt like I was his friend by the end of it all, and we became incredibly close. He would sit after treatment at John's bedside umpteen nights until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night sometimes, talking, and we became friends every time he treated John. I think he did surgery on him about 6 times because he had various complications, and he would always come and talk to me afterwards.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And not only have you become great friends, you're doing extraordinary work together now, which we'll hear about in a moment. But I'd love to hear more about John. When you and I chatted on the phone, you told me that not only were you married to John and that you ran a very successful events company, but you used the word soulmate. And it actually chokes me up a bit to say that now. But tell us a bit about John and why he was so special, Wendy.
Well, he was a very romantic person from my personal point of view. He used to leave rosebuds on my windscreen secretly when we first met.
What a lovely thing to do.
I'd come out. He actually drove all the way up to my parents' home up in Grimsby, and we met at a pub for a drink one day, and then we kissed, and he went back down to London. I went to my mum and dad's home, not knowing that he'd secretly followed me. So next morning when we got up for breakfast, there was a rosebud on the windscreen of my car outside my parents' house, which was an interesting story to recount to them, to make a few explanations, but it was... So he was a very passionate man, and it's easy to say, but it's absolutely true. Everybody loved John. Everybody who worked for him, we worked together. We bought the company from the previous owners, and everybody in our team loved him. He was just a lovable person. All our friends loved him, our suppliers loved him, our clients loved him, because he was just a genuinely nice person.
It's amazing to hear you talk about Grimsby, because you actually lived, we realised, just a few roads away from where my mum still lives and from where I was brought up. So I'm sure I've been in the pub that you and John sat in. Do you remember which one it was?
I can't remember.
That's
I think
okay.
I can't.
You don't have to remember.
It was out in the country somewhere.
And was it also lovely to work with him as well? Because, not only, were you married, you built this business together. So I guess you were 24/7 together.
So many people have said to us then and even now, I can't understand how you can work together as well as living together. But to us, it was always a bonus. It was hard to explain. Sometimes we used to have to stop ourselves and say, right, enough, no more shop. But we used to have board meetings on the planes going out to America and things like that. And it was all fun to him. He was the one who drove the business side. I was the salesperson and I was the operations person, but he was the one who wanted to buy the business, who drove it, who built it up. And so it was all a plus.
And this is an events company, isn't it, that you still run today?
Indeed, yes. I'm still chairman of it. I have a fabulous team who took over, who picked up where John left off. And I'm incredibly lucky to have had that team of people, because I was in bits. My world was in bits. I didn't know which way to turn. And they just scooped me up and said, come on, let's keep going. And here we are, much bigger and bolder and profitable and successful than we were then.
So what actually happened, Wendy, in terms of John and him becoming ill?
So John and I were actually in Canada, partly on holiday and partly to attend an event. And he started to be a bit quieter than he usually was. He loved life, he loved eating, he loved drinking, he had a joie de vivre. But he was a bit quiet and he had a headache. Now, John never had headaches. So I knew after a couple of days that there was something wrong. And we had gone to, I can't remember where, somewhere in Canada, and we were driving over to Quebec City. And I had to take over the driving. He was so bad. And so in the middle of the night, he was just suffering so much that I called the hotel doctor. And it just so happened that the main hospital in Quebec was about 100 yards down the road. And he sent us to the hospital. And within 24 hours, he was diagnosed with a brain tumour.
I can't imagine how either of you reacted to that news. That really was just a complete bolt out of the blue.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
How did you handle that, Wendy? And also, how did John handle that?
Well, John was his usual calm, self. And I believe to this day that John never believed he was going to die. John believed he was going to beat it. I remember walking back from that hospital the first time after his diagnosis, and I knew John was going to die.
Did you?
I did, yeah.
What made you think that, Wendy? Was it just a gut feeling?
It was a gut feeling. It was a gut feeling. They told us in the hospital that it was inoperable, and they wouldn't let us leave the hospital until John had an appointment with a neurosurgeon in London, and our insurers flew a nurse over to travel with us. So it was the inoperable bit that made me think, this is it.
And how did you come to find Kevin once you came back to the UK?
Well, I found him in Canada.
You found him in Canada?
Yes, I had to.
Wow.
I had to call. I called my GP because they wouldn't let him go until he had an appointment with someone. So I rang my GP, and she was absolutely brilliant. She said, "Give me 20 minutes, and I'll find you a selection." So she gave me 3 names, one of which was Kevin's. And it sounds frivolous now, but I chose Kevin because he operated at Charing Cross Hospital, which was easier to park at than the one in Queen Square. So that was the initial driver. And the second thing was when I phoned the number I'd been given, which I presumed was his secretary, he answered the phone. And I thought, gosh, it's not every neurosurgeon who will pick up an outside line.
And did you know from the moment that you met Kevin that he was the right man to take care of John?
He was so natural. We flew home and he came into the hospital on August Bank Holiday Monday, and he just put me at ease, put John at ease, and I could see he was passionate about what he did.
And what was Kevin's prognosis when presumably John was scanned and he looked at those scans?
Kevin never said he's going to die until towards the end, and I was stressing about how long could he go on and such like. And I still remember to this day, Kevin said to me, "You know, Wendy, John's not going to get better." But it was the way he said it. You know, it was he was so easy to talk to and so understanding. He never said, there, dear. He was very matter of fact, but he was always there. He was always there for me if I wanted to talk to him.
And he did his best for John.
He did.
As he said in his podcast, that unfortunately these aggressive stage 4 glioblastomas are often a death sentence. And he has to face that as a surgeon. But the care that he gave you both, and both of you, not just John, sounds absolutely extraordinary and must have been a massive comfort in those days to you.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I think the prognosis for GBMs, as they're abbreviated to, is less than 5 years, or usually between 10 months and 2 years. And the survival rate is minimal.
And John died, sadly, a few months later, didn't he?
10 months.
I can't imagine what happened at that point, but I'm guessing your world just fell apart for a while, Wendy. Do you remember much about those early days and the loss of John and your soulmate in life?
Yeah, I can't really remember now, but I do know, I think I kept it together quite well, but predominantly because, my business team, and I think that's where I was lucky, is that both at work and at home with my friends and family, they kind of scooped me up and just kept me going. And I'm a Virgo, so I'm a detailed person, I'm an organised person, and I knew I just had to keep going and do something. I needed another purpose in my life, and that's one of the reasons I took the decision to do something about it and to make some good come from the bad, if you like, of what John had been through.
You've made a lot of good come from a lot of sadness and bad, and some of it, I guess, was perhaps inspired, was it, by those conversations that you had with John's neurosurgeon, Kevin, at his bedside?
Yes, I knew nothing about brain tumours before John was diagnosed, but Kevin was saying it was shameful that so little was known about brain tumours, and that's the challenge because they're very complex, but was done about research into brain tumours, how they worked, what caused them, how to treat them. And that was where the seeds were sown, I guess. He told me there was no national database for brain tumours. There was no brain tumour registry. There was no research into brain tumours going on at Imperial College. It has come on a huge way since then. There's been lots of developments over those years, but I was shocked there was no national brain tumour charity. No charity raising funds for brain tumours. So that was where the seeds were sown, and I thought, I've got to do something about this.
And how did you, and what did you do? And how long after you lost John? I'm guessing obviously there was a period of deep mourning for John, but did these seeds just keep growing?
So it started because I knew that in my business world, we had a huge network of suppliers and clients, all of whom knew John because he was out and about, and we used to socialise with them and go to events and conferences and so on. So there was a huge swell of sympathy and people wanting to help. And I talked to Kevin about it, and I said, I know there's loads of people who are going to want to do something about this. And so he said, well, why don't you start a research fund for research at Charing Cross? So that was the start of it. And so my team spread the word for me about John's death. And within 6 months, I had £15,000 worth of in memoriam donations. And that was the start of it. And then another dear friend of mine she was in the hotel world and had just opened a new hotel, said, well, we're about to launch our hotel. Why don't you do an event? You're an event organiser. So we held our first Amber Ball at the Grove in Hertfordshire and raised about £25,000 from it. So that was the second thing. And I thought, I should be doing this. I do it for a living. I should be doing this for charity. And that's where the idea of actually starting a charity was concerned. And Kevin was very supportive and actually found out that there was a neuro charity already at Charing Cross. So I started out as a sort of ring-fenced fund at Charing Cross. And then gradually the doctors who had started that to get some piece of kit faded away and Brain Tumour Research Campaign took over.
And why did you call it Campaign, Wendy?
Well, that was very considered and intentional because we always said, Kevin always used to say, the trouble is there's no sustainable research going on and there's not enough of it. And so it was a case of what kind of funding research we wanted to do, but also awareness that we couldn't change the world on our own. And so we knew it needed to be changed. It's the lack of government support and major charities. Cancer Research UK hardly funded anything into brain tumours. So that was the campaign, and we wanted to tell people, not that it was a battle, but it was a campaign, and it was considered and thought through and still is today.
And you have lobbied government, haven't you?
We have,
Tell me about that side of your work.
So I met a group of people who were in a similar position to me, having lost their small daughter or their niece, and we all got together and decided that we were all funding our own specific individual causes, but we needed to do more to raise awareness nationally. And so we formed initially a consortium, and there were probably about 8 or 9 of us then. There are now about 20 in the group, and then gradually created an umbrella charity that is called Brain Tumour Research now. We actually registered it as a full charity, and they've had the critical mass to actually grow and focus on lobbying. They persuaded John Bercow, who some people may remember as the Speaker of the House of Commons back in the noughties, to create the first all-party parliamentary group on brain tumours. And so we have lobbied government. They set up a task and finish force to try and attract more or focus more on funding. Tessa Jowell, you may remember, died horribly from a brain tumour, and she set up the Tessa Jowell, she and her family set up the Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission. So it's working together. It's an awareness that we all have our specific needs to fund specific treatments, whatever our purpose is, but it needs a national approach. So yes, we do lobby. There is still the all-party parliamentary group, Brain Tumour Research, mans the secretariat for that all-party parliamentary group. So it's something that we know we have to do together. We can't do on our own.
Have you lobbied for more research funding as well?
Absolutely, yes. And I think after Tessa Jowell's death, government pledged £40 million of investment in brain tumour research. That was back in 2019, was it, I think? So far they've spent 10.
So you still need
So we still need to
keep
lobby.
pushing.
There's still a lot to do. Yeah.
And why, Wendy, is it, do you think, that brain tumour research is so woefully underfunded when you compare it to other cancers and also the diagnosis rate and the death rate?
That's a big question, really. I think partly because it is such a complex disease, so it's difficult. And often, if funding is short, understandably, researchers will go for the quick fix or for the easier fix. Brain tumours kill more children and young people under 40 than any other cancer.
I didn't realise that.
No, it's a statistic.
That's a shocking
that
statistic.
Few people realise. And so it's difficult. It's complex. So I think that is one reason where it's easier to fund something else. It's harder. And yet, on the other hand, I know certainly talking to researchers, they are more passionate about brain tumours than many other cancer specialities, just because it is so heartbreaking and it is so difficult to fix. I suppose they're stimulated by it. That's the main reason, I think, why it's difficult to fund. And you have these government organisations, NICE, and who have these health economics, and it's the cost versus the benefit that they prioritise over the woeful statistics.
You've done some incredible research so far, some of which Kevin outlined in his episode.
Yeah.
But tell me from your perspective how that began and how you began to fund projects and find scientists and who led the research for you.
So it was all focused at Charing Cross. And of course, I learnt how passionate Kevin was about it. And he had his vision. But also, there were other people at Charing Cross. There was the pathologist at Charing Cross who was also passionate about brain tumour research. And I got to know him a lot, and he actually was the driver to bring people together. And so we funded some PhD students. So we actually started the charity in 2005. And then in 2008, he found a young woman called Nell Syed, who came in as a postdoctoral fellow to us. And within a year, she decided she needed a lab. And so we created our first dedicated molecular neuro-oncology laboratory out of a storage cupboard on the 10th floor of Charing Cross Hospital. And that was the start, really, of our laboratory research. And Nell is still with us today. She drives our laboratory research just down the road at Hammersmith, where Imperial College's medical campus is. And we grew from 3 to 16 people over the years. And so she is another passionate person who is very focused. And I always wanted to do sustainable research. It's unfortunate in many ways that the trend in medical research especially is that researchers sort of have to put together a project and then tout it out and say, please, can I have some money to do this project, which can be a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. But I've always been aware that at the end of those 3 years, whether that project was good, bad, or indifferent, the money runs out and they have to start all over again. And that didn't make sense to me. So Kevin and I had agreed that it would be sustainable research. We wanted it to be a program going from one thing to another. And I think that's one of the shortfalls of most medical research now. But there are increasingly other funding centres, which is what brain tumour research does, or programme researches, and that's what we wanted to do. And so it has been an evolution rather than doing one thing and then going on to something else and so on. And so gradually, it is one step at a time, but one step leads to another, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And are you seeing progress? And is Kevin seeing progress from the work that you started doing all those years ago?
Yes, we are. And I think having Kevin on the one hand and Nell on the other hand, Nell is the scientist, the laboratory side, and Kevin's the clinician. And so it is what they call truly translational. It's that bench to bedside thing that Nell does the research in the lab. And I've always said when they've talked about research, if Kevin can't see it relating to his patients, he's not interested. He just switches off. But it's a two-way thing, because then Kevin, in his clinical work, says, why can't we do this? Or, we should be doing that, and feeds it back to Nell. And so it's a two-way or a circular process. And Kevin has always been interested in the latest technology. So I remember one of the first things that he did was, we were fortunate to have the Mayor of Kensington and Chelsea, who wanted to support us as his Charity of the Year. And he wanted something. And that's always been something else I've felt, that it's not like an appeal for a new church roof, because you don't come away with something at the end of researching brain tumours, other than a cure eventually, I hope. But they wanted something to say. And he said, well, there's this new gadget, this new piece of equipment called a sonar wand. So it would be really nice. They cost about £250,000. It would be really nice to have one or two in Charing Cross. And he'd borrowed one to operate on somebody a few months beforehand. And so that's what we did. So we raised sufficient money to actually buy a sonar wand, and even persuaded Charing Cross Hospital to buy a second one.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think from memory, Kevin was explaining that the sonar wand allows him to see through healthy brain tissue to the cyst or the tumour. So
Yes.
It gives him eyes that he says he's a very visual person, which one would hope is visual in his line of work.
He needs it.
But I think it allows him to see through healthy brain tissue to try and find the bit that needs removing.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding new treatments, and that's the lab side of things, that's the scientific research. But his passion and his vision is getting better equipment and improved technology. And he's done that through various processes. And I'm not going to be able to tell you what they are specifically, because I don't understand their language. But it's the technology that he wants to harness and do the job better, dig deeper down, right into the latest technology.
Well, we've got to make technology work, haven't we?
Indeed.
Things like AI and the latest developments. Kevin spoke very eloquently when he was trying to explain light and how the use of light in the brain and how... I'm not going to explain this either. He'll be listening to this thinking he should have been here.
I know, and I should know too. I think it's
not at all. But were you involved in that as well, in that part of research
Indeed.
that enabled him? I think he was talking about how different light can highlight different parts, and therefore you can find the tissue that isn't healthy or the tumour or the cyst more easily, because it can mask itself as healthy brain tissue, I remember him saying.
Yes, and that actually came about when we were able to fund Kevin's first clinical research fellow. So he had an amazing man called Baba. I remember his name was Baba Vakas, and he's still associated with Kevin and still is researching with him. But he had an amazing way of explaining it. I remember him once talking to some young children about this, and he got this bottle of water and put some dye in it and some cloudy stuff, and he was showing them how it worked by shining the light through it. And I think it's called Raman spectroscopy, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But that's what he's about. That's what Kevin wants to do. That is Kevin's goal, is to stay on top and to find new ways of treating patients, not just new treatments in terms of drugs or techniques. It's the actual way of improving the efficacy, I guess, of eliminating these tumours.
You've been on such a steep learning curve, Wendy. Not only starting a charity, there you were running a very successful events company, and then all of this happens, and not only are you now running an incredible charity, but your knowledge, I guess you never thought you'd start learning about this kind of research. And I'm just sitting here wondering if in some ways all of this incredible positive stuff that you're doing for other people has helped a little bit with the grief of losing John.
Absolutely. Everything relates back to John. And I didn't wake up one day and say, I think I'd like to get into the third sector and be involved in charity work. Definitely not. I was driven to it because of John. And I do have a thirst for knowledge, if you like, and I've spent years attending brain tumour conferences, sitting through research meetings at Charing Cross and at Hammersmith, listening to researchers talk about it. I meet with Kevin and Nell every other week, and they talk about the research they're doing. I probably understand one word in 6, but I keep thinking that by osmosis, eventually I will pick up more than I have, but it's interesting, but John's always there. He's always there in the back, and he sometimes comes out and bites me in the bum, but it's why I get out of bed every day. It's become my own passion without actually being able to do anything physically about it. But I use my business skills in the charity world to try and do the right thing.
I think you use your business skills, also your personal skills. You're a very personable, likeable person. We liked each other from the first moment we had a phone conversation, and when we met, we had a big hug, didn't we? I know that I'm going to know you in my life. But I think what also you bring to the table that I'm sure nobody forgets, Wendy, that the others perhaps don't bring to the table is lived experience, and that is what drives you. And as you say, John's there, isn't he? He is. Driving you and pushing you forward. And it is really amazing to hear about living through a tragedy and actually doing, often these charities are formed, aren't they, from somebody's lived experience and desire to make the world better.
Indeed. And I think people are sometimes critical that there are too many charities and we should all join forces and such like, but they do forget that lived experience. And people don't set up a charity just for the sake of things. It's because they perceive a gap. There's something hasn't happened and they want to do something to make it better. And I am a firm believer that as long as there isn't duplication and waste, there's nothing wrong with there being lots of charities if they're all doing something to make something better. And that's what drives me as well. And that's what is my purpose, really.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. Tell me a bit more about the campaign in terms of what you do to help other people, because it isn't just the scientific and research side. You're there for people too, aren't you?
Well, we are, and I do have to be very careful because the charity's purpose is research-related, and frankly, it's purely volunteer. We have no employees. I have nobody working for me. I have a group of very passionate fundraisers and volunteers who help where they can and help with events, but I don't have the wherewithal to provide patient support. I'm not a counsellor. I don't have any professional skills there. And that's the beauty of the umbrella charity, because I have fellow member charities who do specialise in patient support. And so we network and we provide the link and point them in the right direction, if you like. But certainly many of the time somebody's rung me and I've just had to help them and talk to them. And likewise at events, when people come up and talk to me about it, I feel that's something I can give to them in terms of my life experience. But I can't be all things to all men. And that's where, again, it's the sharing amongst the other charities that we all help each other. And I know a man who can.
Well, knowing a man who can is great. And it must have made you smile a little bit when the whole world discovered the surgeon with the cape, Kevin O'Neill. And you like, I've known him 20-something years.
Indeed,
I mean, everybody now, obviously he's a very special person, and you can see that from everything he's done so far. And well done, Davina, for outing him. I think that was a jolly good idea. But I wonder if you had a wry little smile to yourself that this is somebody you knew was very special and has really helped your charity develop for a long, long time. You've known he's wearing a cape, really, haven't you, Wendy?
Indeed. And I think everybody who knows him, who has known him for a long time, feels the same way. He frustrates the hell out of me sometimes, but that's absolutely right. And I always say, if he is late or can't come or has to drop you at the last minute, it's because he's making his patients better. And that is what drives him. But it's also his passion. Fellow charity members who all respect Kevin for what he does. It is his vision, it is his passion that is what drives him. And everybody turns to him for that. And yes, as you say, Davina's made the rest of the world aware of it. But something that I smile wryly at when I've seen all the comments that came in from the Instagram posts, and it's, oh, Kevin treated me too. And they're all coming out of the woodwork again, which is an interesting concept. And I think Kevin's aware of that suddenly he's seeing people that are still alive and he's treated. And it must be hugely satisfying for him too.
Absolutely. Now, you've raised more than £4.5 million already. What are the plans moving forward, Wendy? What are the aims and goals of BTRC?
So we need more money. We desperately need to fundraise, because what I want to do is to give Kevin and Nell a stable foundation that they can achieve their goals, because I know they want to do what's good, and I really want to get them a sustainable future. And it all happens too slowly. We know that there isn't enough progress. We haven't found a cure. We're finding bits, it's baby steps, but I want to keep taking those baby steps to make a real difference for them, because they are passionate about it. And brain tumour research, at the end of the day, is about people. It's about people who have the skills and have the passion to make changes and to improve the future of their patients or the people they're doing the research for.
How can we help, Wendy? If people are listening to this and think, I'd like to get involved, what can people do?
They can give me some money.
And that can be small too, can't it? That
absolutely.
Can be running a 5K or something sponsored.
You know, we're very lucky in many ways. Again, we're small, we're passionate at BTRC, at Brain Tumour Research Campaign. We run 2 events a year. One is a dog show, which sounds crazy, at Parsons Green in Fulham, and last year we raised £19,500. How do you do that from running a dog show at £10 a class? Well, it's the donations that come along with it. But aside from that, the money we get is from individual people saying, I want to jump out of a plane, or I want to run a marathon, or I want to do something. I want to have a coffee morning. It doesn't matter if it's £20, £2,000 or whatever it is, every little helps. And so if people want to do something, they can do that and they can dedicate it, they can send it to us. But also, we are a purely volunteer organisation, so I have a very dedicated group of people who are on a fundraising committee and help with the dog show and the carol concert and other things. But there are other opportunities. And when people say, I want to help, what can I do? And I have to turn it round to them and say, well, what do you feel you can do? Because I can't tell you to do a flower arranging course if you don't know what a flower is. So it's for people to think within themselves, what could I do that could raise a bit of money to help BTRC? And then come to me and I'll support them. I'll help them. I'll give them a T-shirt. I'll do whatever it takes. And really, nothing is too small.
That's a nice phrase to end on. Nothing is too small. Wendy, thanks for sharing such a personal story. I know this is the start of a lovely friendship for us. And as you know, my best friend from school, Paula, died last year of the same aggressive tumour as John. So count me in. Is there anything I can do to help? And I know we've been chatting already. There's all sorts I can do to help. And I will. But yeah, thank you, Wendy. It's great to hear part 2 of the story.
Thank you for creating the opportunity, Helen. I'm really grateful.
You're so welcome. You've been listening to Wendy Fulcher, who founded the amazing Brain Tumour Research Campaign with brilliant neurosurgeon Kevin O'Neill. Do give the charity a follow on socials at BTRC Charity on Instagram. And if you're taking part in any sponsored events this year, looking for a cause, then I'm sure Wendy would love to hear from you. She's really easy to track down actually on their website, or just leave a message for the Convex Conversation and we'll hook you up. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with marine biologist Dr. Kerry Lewis, updating us on the Convex Seascape Survey and sharing her latest research from Galapagos. Join me then.